Fear Not, Episode 146. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hello, everybody. Today you and I are going to be joined by mneill. Welcome, Michael. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Michael is an internationally renowned transformative coach and the best-selling author of The Inside Out Revolution and The Space Within. He has spent over 25 years as a coach, advisor, friend, mentor, and creative spark plug to celebrities, CEOs, royalty, and people who want to get more out of themselves and their lives. Michael's weekly radio show, Living from the Inside Out, has been a listener favorite on the Hay House Radio for over a decade. His TED Talk, Why Aren't We Awesomer?, has been viewed by over 170,000 people around the world. Michael, can you take a few moments to fill in those gaps and maybe give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
Ooh, gosh, I'm a Libra. I've been married for 27 years. Been with my wife for 29, going on 30 years now. We met when I was at drama school in London. She was a dancer, I was an actor. 3 kids, a dog named Sergeant Pepper, and given what I do for a living, a kind of a boring life. I mean, maybe not. Like, I do get to travel the world and do cool stuff with cool people, but I always feel like my great joy in life is snuggling up with Nina and the kids and the dog watching Netflix. So that's how I roll.
Sounds good to me. And thank you so much for sharing that. Michael, can we start off today by having you help us to understand what fear is?
Yeah, to me, there are 2 different things that people mean when they say fear. And one of them, and this is actually the least common, is the actual biological survival mechanism that we experience in the presence of a clear, immediate danger. And that comes with an incredible amount of energy, and it makes us feel unbelievably alive. And most people I speak with have either never really experienced that kind of fear, or they've only experienced it in sport, when they're rock climbing or skiing or doing something where they deliberately have placed themselves in a life-threatening situation. And it's interesting because a lot of extreme athletes I've spent time with, they are very open about the fact that they keep putting themselves into more and more extreme physical situations in order to experience more of that blessed, glorious living fear. Now, what most people mean when they talk about fear is the incessant, obsessive regurgitation of habitual thinking, where you take the idea of something that would be scary if it happened, and you keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it to the point where it makes you sick with the chronic mental stress of driving your own adrenaline system to distraction. And that's the kind of fear that we really can live without.
I know that a lot of your work focuses on mindset. So what can you help us with today so that we can have a correct mindset, so that we can, not deal with that particular type of fear where it's just constantly thinking over and over again about these things, coulda, shoulda, woulda sort of things that may never actually happen?
Well, I think what's probably more helpful than trying to describe a correct mindset is doing my best to describe what's actually going on inside our heads. Because when people see that, mindset kind of sorts itself out. So you're always going to do some of that. We are creatures of habit. So there will always be a flow of thought through our head, and we don't control what thoughts come into our head from moment to moment. Some of those thoughts will be scary, and when we think about them, we'll feel scared. But to the extent that you see that that is all that's going on, you're in a scary movie. And when you're in a scary movie, it gets scary sometimes. You're not inclined to do anything about it. Like you're not inclined to go up. If you were actually in a scary movie, you wouldn't be inclined to go up and and try and save the characters in the movie. You wouldn't be inclined to in some way sit there and affirm to yourself, I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I can because that's not the point of the movie. Like the point of a movie is to get lost in the movie. It's not to watch the projector. But if you get too scared and you know that if you close your eyes and ears, it goes away in a movie, well, then you can go to a scary movie because you know you can kind of opt out when you need to. It's kind of the same in our minds. When we see that what we're scared of is thought, and thought by its very nature comes and goes and flows and changes, we can either just go with it, in which case it'll be over in a minute, or we can kind of ignore it, knowing that it'll go on its own. It's just a movie. It's our experience is real. The fear that we're feeling, we really feel it in our body, but the cause is not outside of our own head. It's just the feeling of thought in the moment.
So it sounds like you're asking us to be a watcher or an observer, really, detach ourselves.
Well, I would say it a little differently, though I don't disagree with you. I would say that the natural effect of seeing the nature of thought and the nature of fear as being made of thought is we are detached from it because we see it for what it is. So there is a difference between trying to be an observer, which is an act of practice and will, and understanding, which just changes us. So I share a story in my newest book, which will be out later this year, is called Creating the Impossible. And I share a story right at the beginning of it of a guy I met. I live in LA now. And he lived in LA up until the last big earthquake in 1994. And then he moved to New York City because he wanted to get as far away from here as possible. And the day he gets to New York City, his first night in his new apartment in the Bronx, he wakes up in the middle of the night, about 6 a.m., I think it was, and it's an earthquake. And he freaks out and he jumps out of bed and he runs to the doorway because that's the safest place supposedly to be in an earthquake. And he thinks, well, how the hell did I be? There's never been an earthquake in New York. What did I do? But he kind of calms down because it passes in about 30 seconds. And then 15 minutes later, there's an aftershock. And he's, again, just totally freaks out. And this keeps happening until it dawns on him the third or fourth time that it's not an earthquake, it's the subway. Now, once he saw that it was the subway, he didn't need to keep watching. He didn't need to observe. He didn't need to detach. He knew it was the subway. So the subway would come and go, and most of the time he wouldn't even notice it. And if he did notice it and have a bit of a startle, well, then he'd laugh at himself and get on with his day. When we start to see that fear is not what we think of as fear is not telling us anything about the world. It's just the feeling of that thought in the moment. We don't have to do anything about it. We're immediately free of it. We're immediately detached from it. And it stops looking any more significant than people wearing red t-shirts, right? If somebody were to say to you, look, I perform really well, but if there are people with red t-shirts in the room, I can't do it. You would kind of think, wow, that's weird. But if somebody says, I perform really well, but when I'm feeling fear, I can't perform, that sounds plausible to us. That sounds sensible to us. But it's really just as arbitrary to think that we can only perform when we feel a certain way. We can perform in any feeling. That's the beauty of the human system. It's designed to handle it. But when we obsess about certain feelings and start going, I want only these ones and not these ones, we sacrifice that flow, we sacrifice that freedom of mind, and then we get caught in looking to our heads instead of being in the world.
So how how do we get to that sort of transformational position? I mean, you know, I know it sounds sort of contrary that to actually do something, but what do we do?
Well, I sometimes describe it like this. There is nothing to do, but there is something to see. So we start to look to fear. We start to look to see what can we see about it. And when people start to look to it, not to fix it, but to see its nature, to understand it, they start to notice, this just comes and it goes almost at random. Like I can sometimes be in a situation that other people would describe as scary and I feel fine, and sometimes be in a situation that no one sees as scary and feel really scared. And we start to see that our fear, our feeling of fear, is not as connected to circumstance as we think it is. So I share a story in the TED Talk about, and this happened. I was on a show called Put It to the Test when I lived in the UK, and they brought me on to demonstrate the NLP phobia cure, which is something that I used to do as part of my work, where they brought on 3 people who were certified phobic of spiders, and they put them on EEG, EKG machines to show their physiological response. And during the show, I worked with them, and within 30 minutes, they could hold a spider in their hand with almost no movement on the EEG or EKG. That wasn't actually terribly impressive to me because I had been doing that for years. What impressed me was the dress rehearsal. Because in the dress rehearsal, the stage manager brought out a clear plastic box and said, during the live show, there will be spiders in this box. And all 3 of them spiked off the charts on the EEG and EKG machines. And that was when I really saw we're not afraid of what we think we're afraid of. We're afraid of thought. And once we see thought for what it is, this kind of energy that's incredibly creative, and it comes and it goes in our heads all day long, it just doesn't scare us in the same way as it did. I'll give you a different example. My son, when he was younger, was terrified of the trailer for the preview for the How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the Jim Carrey movie. He would literally hide. He'd start sobbing. We'd have to take him out of the movie theater because he didn't yet understand the difference between a movie and real life. Once he got movies, he now willingly pays money to go to scary movies. It's kind of the same with us. Until we understand how the mind creates our experience, how thought creates feeling, it really does look like whatever's scaring us in our heads is a real and present danger we have to deal with. When we start to see the nature of thought as it's transient, it comes and it goes, it just stops being scary in the same way, and we start to even enjoy it, which is kind of the experience that I described at the beginning that the extreme athletes have, where they like that feeling. And the only way they know to generate that feeling is by putting themselves into a clear and present danger.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems, at least in my thoughts, that this sort of getting to know fear, it harkens a little bit for me like the Joseph Campbell sort of going into the center of the labyrinth and staring the beast down and knowing it and sort of removing its power. Is that a correct assumption?
Do you know, I like that analogy in this sense. The beast in the center of the labyrinth is fear itself, not what we think we're afraid of. So it isn't saying, go to the cliff edge. It isn't saying, hold a snake. It isn't saying, hold a spider. It isn't saying, go make a presentation in front of 100 people, if that's what you think you're afraid of. It's saying, go to the center of the labyrinth and look to the nature of fear itself, independent of circumstance. And yes, at that point, the fear will lose its power. because you'll see it for what it is, an avatar, an illusion, a thought in the moment.
What could you recommend for us to do that we could start today to get to that point?
Do you know, the thing that comes to mind is to get suspicious. Like, instead of assuming that, oh, well, I'm scared of this, but I can overcome it, or, well, I'm scared of that, but I can somehow change the fear, to literally just get a little more suspicious the next time you're feeling fear of where it's coming from. And instead of assuming, well, it must be this or that, to start to see, where is this coming from? What is this really? And if, I've seen this every time, if you start to look in that direction, not to what you think you're afraid of, but to thought as the source of fear, it does something for people. And it doesn't mean you'll never feel fear again. But what it means is that fear becomes less and less crippling and less something you have to particularly pay attention to, and more just a part of the fabric of your daily experience. And it neither holds you back nor drives you forward.
Michael, if someone would like to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So mneill.org is the sort of sandbox we've created on the web where we do podcasts and blogs and I share videos every week and all the stuff that we do. And for most people, they've told me that the introduction that is most helpful to them is to watch the TED Talk, Why Aren't We Awesomer?, which you can also find on the site at mneill.org.
Michael, what parting advice could you leave with us today?
It's difficult to give parting advice without sounding a little bit trite, I think, sometimes, because it's like, now kids, go try this at home. But I think the thing that I have found most helpful is realizing that I don't have to master fear to live a relatively fearless life. I just have to see it for what it is. And in the same way as I used to be scared of, I'm trying to think of something. Trust me, I used to be scared of a lot of things. But let's say I used to be scared of clouds, right? Well, I'm just not scared of clouds anymore. Clouds haven't changed. They just don't look scary to me anymore, even when they take scary shapes. And just knowing that your relationship with fear can completely transform without the world having to change at all, for a lot of people, that gives them a lot of hope. And I would encourage that.
Thank you so much for giving that to us today. I want to let everyone know, too, that Michael has generously donated a copy of his book, The Inside Out Revolution, that we'll be giving away. So if you would like an opportunity to win, visit the giveaways page at livingbeyondyourfears.com and submit your free entry form today. Michael, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. You have definitely challenged us to rethink fear and to handle this. So I appreciate you coming on the show and giving us your time and your wisdom. So thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.